Some days, waking up and sitting here is easy, peaceful. Some days it's a struggle. Some days I can't even remember how I got started doing this. I mean, the yoga, the meditation. I went to church when I was a kid. I hate church now. I mean, hate is a strong word, but I'm definitely not a religious person. I wonder if I'm one of those people that describes themselves as spiritual but not religious. I don't know. I mean, am I Buddhist? Am I Hindu? Could I even be Hindu if I wanted to? I wonder. I left searching for an answer to a question that I couldn't really even form, but I knew there was people I could talk to. So I thought I'd go see someone who has embraced this influence and see how they feel about this.
I was still a young child, 4 or 5, when I had understanding the transmigration of souls.
Really?
I knew that that's what I was experiencing. I can tell you why.
So why?
That first memory I had in the crib, and my first, actions hit me to I had been here before. There was somewhere that I had come from, at any rate, right? So by the time I was like 4 or 5, I had seen enough already to know that what was happening didn't really have anything to do with me, this me, and I had no control over it. I didn't really like it, but I understood that its causal relationship to this me was that it was stuff coming back to me relative to my history. And I knew that I had a choice. I could do one of two things. Respond in a like fashion, or break the chain. That's how it started for me. Now, Hinduism offers all kinds of really great stuff, as we can see, right? That's why so many people like it, on whatever level they consume it. Whether or not some people think it's too commercial. Yeah. So, it gets people doing it. I keep up with my practice, that's what I do every day.
Yeah.
Every day, I meditate, contemplate, try to figure out what's been revealed to me in dream time. Pray for clarity. Give myself up to the goddess for purification, divine integration, clarity.
I like Joe. He seems to have wholly embraced this Indian culture with no qualms, but I figured I'd head to the Vedanta Center in Hollywood and meet some monks and get their thoughts about this.
In 1893, they were holding a World Parliament of Religions, and Swami Vivekananda was asked by somebody in India, one of the Maharajas in India, to come over and represent Hinduism. Now, he didn't know that you had to actually have been asked and needed references and papers, but he came over anyway. And fortunately, through very interesting stories, he was able to get onto the Parliament and gave some talks that were extremely influential. People were so moved by this idea of openness and acceptance of all faiths and so forth that he became a very popular speaker around the United States, so much so that he was invited back in 1899 to give more lectures. And so on that tour, through another set of very interesting circumstances, he ended up coming to Los Angeles, and there were 3 sisters that were living in South Pasadena who had read his first book and were very taken by it and wanted to hear him. So they went down to hear him lecture and asked them if he would stay with them for a while after he was finished with his series in Los Angeles and give some lectures in the Pasadena area. And he accepted. So he stayed there for about 6 weeks, and over the next 3 decades, various swamis would visit Los Angeles and give talks, but there was no real center here. Now, there was a center in La Crescenta, but nothing in the Los Angeles area. So one of those 3 sisters had moved here, and she asked our headquarters in India that if they would accept the donation of her house, they could start a center here. And so they accepted that idea and sent Swami Prabhavananda to start the work in December of 29. So the work gradually expanded, and they built the temple in the late 30s, and there were 3 literary figures from England that were quite influential in our early history: Aldous Huxley, Gerald Heard, and Christopher Isherwood. And through their influence, the center became quite popular among intellectuals, and all 3 of them would help Swami Prabhavananda with his translations of the various Indian scriptures and so forth. So that's how the center got started.
This thing of Hindu versus non-Hindu is an ongoing, endless debate. I do not consider myself a Hindu. Who is a Hindu? Well, we could say a person born, brought up in India, with all the beliefs thereof. I'm very much a Westerner. I've studied the cultural differences between the 2 groups, and they're quite different. If I practice meditation, does that make me a Hindu? Not by my definition, but by someone else's it does.
Okay, honestly, that just made me even more confused. He has a Hindu practice, doesn't consider himself Hindu, but he's a monk. I'm going to talk to my friend Neelam and see what she thinks. I know she has strong opinions about this. We've talked about it.
A very strong memory that I carry, traveling so much as we did from England to India all the time, going to Delhi airport, was that we would constantly see Westerners, with their backpacks, and so it was something that I was always aware of, even on a very kind of, subconscious level, because I would always see them, and anytime we were traveling, getting the bus from Delhi to Punjab, which is where I was from, I would always see, or going to some of the temples or whatever it might be, Vaishnav Devi, you would see Westerners around, and they would always be with their rucksacks, and they would always be, and it would always strike me that they were always kind of those Westerners that we would see, you know, they were always kind of, in some ways, I just remember always thinking, you know, God, I'm Indian, but they're trying to be more Indian than I am, you know. And I remember even when I was very young, kind of having that thought. And I think that coming here, and the older I've gotten, the more I've thought about it. I mean, in a sense, there's a logic to it, right? Because in the West, we are so removed from any kind of spirituality or any kind of connection to the earth or any kind of meaning in life. You know, everything is so much, especially here in the US. And I'd heard people talk about it, you know, but I'd never really understood what they meant till I came here to live. Western society, in many ways, very surface. They're very surface societies. Do you know what I mean? They're very, you know, it's very much about the appearance of things as opposed to the substance of things. I meet people who have maybe known about something to do with Hinduism for like 2 years, you know, and think that they know, or 2 months, and they just think that that somehow they are now the world expert and that they have the right to speak. You know, and I've just seen the most ridiculous conversations here in this country, you know, and have really tried my best to avoid being part of those conversations, which isn't always possible, but there's a way in which there's a deep lack of humility, which I think is connected to the culture we're in. It's part of that bigger culture, you know, of being really kind of just thinking you know everything, when actually, on a world scale, you know very, very little compared to other communities in other countries. But there's no recognition of that. And so I think that's the other piece of it to me, is that I think that people who describe themselves as spiritual rather than religious, I think there's a humility that kind of goes with that.
Humility. It always comes up when discussing spirituality. What I find most interesting, I guess, is one is supposed to remain humble, yet simultaneously remember that they are divine. And all is divine. You're divine, I'm divine, we're all divine. Just don't let it go to your head. Apparently. Ugh, more questions.
The question is, what does a relational practice, and particularly what does the concept of a relational divinity actually bring to the practice itself over and above the practice itself? He did an experiment in which there were two conditions. There was the treatment condition, which was a relational engagement with a divinity, and another group which was definitely saying things in meditation about a divinity, but not actually engaging that divinity relationally. Does it make sense?
Yes.
So what we found, and this is one of the most exciting findings, is when Michael followed up on the individuals, and remember, these individuals were completely naive to yogic practice at the beginning. In fact, most of them came from some kind of Christian background. They were elderly individuals, or older, I should say. They were from 55 on up to, I think, about 70, 75. And what he found were shifts in subjective well-being, for sure. But what he found after 6 months of stopping the training, the group that was involved in the relational meditation was 8 times more likely to continue with the practice than the other group. Amazing. That's never been demonstrated, that you have that much of an effect by manipulating one little variable. Same teacher, same teachings, simply a different orientation and different phrasing within the meditation. Amazing.
When I was first coming here, it was in the 60s, and Hinduism was really hot in those days. Now it's Buddhism. I think the key is people who've been, some people have been brought up in the standard Christian dialogue, and the way it's expressed, I'm not saying the way it is at heart, but the way it's expressed, they don't like it, and they're kind of taught, if you don't want to be Jewish or Christian, there's nothing for you. So I think it's a welcome relief to find out that in the Asian tradition, there's a lot of very satisfying philosophy
A welcome relief, yes. Having my family wonder if I joined a cult, not a relief.
I understand the obsession that Americans have with Eastern philosophy, right? Because it's just the human need, innate need and desire to make meaning out of something that's meaningless, right? So it kind of really logically makes a lot of sense. But there's something also about it that is very kind of irksome, you know, because it's kind of, and you know, maybe if the experience of people of color with, you know, Westerners, with white folks, Europeans, however you want to describe it, maybe if the experiences had been different historically, then the feeling about it would be different, right? But just knowing everything that I know and have learned historically about the way that people of color have been treated and the way that our cultures and religions and, you know, our humanity has been dehumanized on so many levels, in so many ways, in different ways for the different cultures, you know, whether it be Africa or India or where we are right now, Mesoamerica, you know. They've been, those different cultures have in so many ways been, you know, really disrespected, you know, is a very mild word, I would say, that comes to mind. Much less to talk of the horror that's been perpetrated against people, actually. But let's just talk about the cultures for a minute, you know. So it's very hard to swallow that now the same people who have kind of been involved in that or are now so serious about taking on those same philosophies and cultures and religions as part of their spiritual belief. You know, there's something about that that's troubling, and I'm not God and don't, you know, pretend to be, and maybe it's a good thing that they're seeking that out, you know, and therefore I try very hard not to be judgmental about it, but it definitely is very bothersome to me because a lot of the time even what I see is on a very surface level. There's very little that people who actually, you know, might be following some basic practice that they think is to do with Eastern philosophy or Eastern religion, and yet the way that what they've done to learn about that is very little. You know, they go to a yoga class and they learn one word, and then that's kind of their thing that they do, you know, and then they think that they can talk about it and they can be in it, and they can. And like I said, who am I to say that they can't, right? You know, the world is what it is and we're all free to do what we want, but there is something, as somebody who's from that culture, who's rooted in that culture, and who has in many ways rejected some of that culture, there's something about that I find quite bothersome.
See, I knew it mattered. And I'm willing to bet that she's not the only one that feels that way. I mean, I remember being a kid and getting into junior high school and high school and noticing that a lot of my white friends were starting to listen to rap music and hip-hop and feeling like, hey, wait, what are you doing? That's mine. I mean, I'm not even black. I guess you would call me multiracial. But I identified myself with that culture. I grew up with that. My friends were all parts of that culture. And so now that I'm consuming someone else's culture, I guess I'm just trying to figure out the best way to be conscious of that and be respectful of that. I mean, how do we have these conversations? Like, why aren't we even talking about it?
You know, I think one of the issues here goes back to how propagandized Americans are. I mean, you know what? It's like the Swamis. They talk about, you know, being political and spiritual, and I really feel that. You know, because what's going on in the world today is because people abuse power. They're manipulative. And back in the 50s, there's a phrase that began in America, early propaganda phrase, like why what we're talking about exists, that people feel uncomfortable discussing spiritual issues in any kind of setting that they ought to feel comfortable discussing it in.
Right.
Where are you going to talk about it if you're not comfortable talking about it with your friends?
Right.
For God's sake. So the saying that whoever came up with was, you don't discuss religion or politics in polite company. So the people that want to manipulate the way we think, because thought precedes material reality, which if they're after power and money, you excise from people's thinking what's most important to your well-being. It's spiritual matters first and foremost, and politics, how your environment is run by those who run it, and do you have any say? Don't talk about it. And we still feel that effect today. Propaganda's powerful. Fox News. Look at what the Americans have been abused with. We need to get these things talked about widely.
So my name's Kira, and I've been practicing yoga for over 20 years. I started because I had a ski accident. I was skiing with my older brother in the Poconos and actually skied off a cliff and dropped 20 feet and was in a lot of pain for quite a long time. And I found the only thing that was actually beneficial, the only thing that seemed to help was the practice of yoga. So I started going more frequently, and a huge part of my life. Even though I came to yoga for physical reasons, after several years of practicing, it became much more than that and went much deeper. So now it's much more of a mental practice for me and a way for me to bring my mind into a very peaceful state. After the body began to change, my physical body, and I started feeling stronger and more flexible, then I feel like I was more open to the other things that were changing. Like, I found that after yoga practice, my mind would become more even and more peaceful. And when I stepped off the mat, I felt better. I felt better about who I was as a person and where I'm going in my life. So the physical changes brought me to the mat, but what's kept me continually practicing and coming back and back and back again is the benefits for my mind.
Benefits for the mind. I can vouch for that. I mean, I don't do yoga in public because I don't like shaking my way through all the poses. It's kind of embarrassing, especially since most yoga classes tend to be filled with women. However, I have sat for a 10-day Vipassana course, which is a silent meditation course, and aside from the not talking for 10 days, which actually was a relief after about the third day, I was surprised that it was so mentally relaxing. I mean, I went for I guess you could call it looking for some kind of spiritual liberation, but what actually happened was my mind, my brain literally felt better afterwards. It turns out there's a reason.
Sarah Lazar, she has done a prominent and very well done voxel-wise brain morphometry of brains of individuals who practice and teach Vipassana training. These individuals who teach and practice Vipassana, and they've done so for 10 or 15 or more years, they have higher preserved brain gray matter volume in those areas compared to a set of control individuals who were controlling for education, ethnicity, gender, socioeconomic status, all of that stuff. And this is particularly important because we know that the brain decreases in volume over age, and these people did not show that age-related decrease, that is the practitioners and teachers they did not show the age-related decrease in those areas.
Indian philosophy had this very interesting idea that the universe was made up of these 5 elements. Now, when it got translated into the Greek, it didn't get translated very well. But in the Hindu scriptures, it's akasha, which means space, and they related it to the ear. They related each of these to a sense organ. And I'm pretty sure that means gravity, because you sense the gravitational field with your ear. We're not talking about sound waves, but we're talking about our sense of balance. Then from akasha comes vayu. If you have gravity and things start to fall together by gravity, they start to move, and that's kinetic energy. And the symbol for that was vayu, which is wind. It's not air, it's wind. It's the movement of the air. And so, again, the translation missed a little bit. Then from vayu comes tejas, that which shines. It's not fire. Fire is an example of something that shines. So that's another case where the translation has misled us, I think. So we have gravity, kinetic energy, radiation. Then they talk about Ap and Prithivi, which is water and earth. And those are still fairly good translations. But I think the energies that they represent would be electricity and magnetism. The earth is an enormous magnet, and water is a very good electrical dipole molecule, an electrically polar molecule. These 5 energies are things which every atom in the universe is sensitive to. In fact, our sense organs couldn't operate if they didn't. There'd be no way to create an eye if atoms themselves weren't sensitive to radiation. And so your atoms, individual atoms, are sensitive to gravity, electricity, kinetic energy, electricity, magnetism. Did I leave one out? I think that's 5 of them. And so we can have sense organs. We have a sense of touch, we have a sense of taste, we have a sense of gravity, and so forth. So this sensation, or this ability to process the sensory data, just gets more and more sophisticated as you go up the evolutionary chain, and then it appears as some sort of self-consciousness when it comes to human beings. But I think if you work that way, you'll have a lot better chance of getting some sort of coherent theory about consciousness.
I don't think that the neuroscience will ever be able to give an individual better insight than, say, a given teacher for that individual. However, I do think we will get to the point where we will be able to better advise individuals without a teacher, who haven't had a teacher, that we would be able to better advise them that given your current profile, and that could change later on in life, later on in practice, given where you are currently, neurally, with your assessment, we could probably predict with not great accuracy, but definitely better than chance, that maybe one should try Vipassana, or one should try Shamatha, or you see how I'm saying. Right. And then, from then on, I think the neuroscience helps us in asking, all right, well, how do these practices affect disease progressions? How do they affect a person's well-being? How do they affect, even, in terms of a group level effect, a person's willingness to be kind and to serve others, which is, in my view, the most important, significant outcome, byproduct, say, of the goal of doing the practice, frankly. And we'll be able to say something about that. But in terms of providing sort of individualized assessments, that I don't think, A, the science would ever be able to do, given the probabilistic nature of the science. And 2, I think it would, so A, we shouldn't do it. B, I don't think we shouldn't do it because it's not rigorous science to do it. And B, I don't think we should do it because it actually subverts the basis of the practices themselves. frankly, there is quite a bit yet that we don't know.
Based on what we know of the West and sort of fads and fashions, it's most probably a fad. Like who knows? Like I would like to think and like to hope that it's more than that. It's been, I mean, there has been a fascination with yoga and Hinduism now for some time in the West, particularly here in the US. There has been, and so one would hope that there's going to be that core of people who really kind of stay at it and maybe really try and deepen their experience of it, you know. But really, when you look at the way things kind of work here, you'd have to sort of, if you really had to guess or really had to come to a conclusion, then you'd have to, based on everything, you'd have to say most likely it's going to be a fad.
I think if the entire planet was practicing, we would be in such a better place. If all the politicians in the world, all the government officials were practicing yoga, we'd be in a very different place than where we are right now.
So I don't know what's going to happen, but I do know that the world's in bad shape and we have to talk about it. And we can't be afraid to talk about spirit.
Yoga and meditation certainly have an Indian flavor to them, but they're certainly related to things that we find in the West as well. Various stretching exercises and so forth, and many of them are very similar to yoga exercises. And in Christianity, they now have the idea of centering prayer, which they feel was a very ancient tradition which sort of got lost, but seeing meditation practices in the East, they sort of went back and found those practices and have reawakened them. So it's sort of like food. I mean, we might go out for Chinese food or Mexican food, but it's all food. It's all fats, carbohydrates, and proteins, and various vitamins and minerals, and it just depends on what flavor they have. And we enjoy different flavors, and we can learn how to cook different things from looking at different cultures. And I think the same thing's true with religious practices. You can just see how other cultures have done it and adapt what feels comfortable for you.
That makes a lot of sense. It's kind of like food. I mean, I know myself, sometimes I want sausage gravy and biscuits for breakfast, maybe a burrito or some Thai food for lunch, maybe some Chinese food or spaghetti for dinner. And I mean, what's more American than that? And I guess that's it, right? This country is so diverse, but yet so young, that a lot of this dissolving of one culture into another and the fruits of it are just beginning to show themselves. And maybe that's me, a new blooming fruit. Oh, I've been called so much worse. But that's cool, I can totally live with that. It feels pretty sweet.
Japen jayamapnoti chanantapalamapnuyat hinakaramacha jan sarvam sthanani chadamani cha. Japam hinasanam kurvan hinakarama phalapradan Guru Gitam Prayaneva Sangrame Rupasangate. Japan Jayam Avapnoti Marane Muktidayakam Sarvakarmacha Sarvatra Guru Putrasya Siddhyate. Idam rahasyam novacham tavagre khattitam maya sugopyam च प्रयत्नेन